Queer News and Journalism is a Gay 45 original podcast published every week on Thursdays, where we come together to comment on the topics in the weekly queer news published by our newsletter, The Nine. Subscribe on gay45.com to get the latest news every week. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission today is pretty focused. We're diving deep into this week's global queer news, pulling insights straight from the latest Gay 45 Digest. We've got quite a mix of developments showing this real global struggle, big policy wins alongside some, pretty disturbing authoritarian moves.
It really does highlight this push and pull, doesn't it? Facing the community right now. On one hand, we're seeing these complex, hard-won policy victories in Europe, especially around digital rights and privacy.
That hard one is right.
But then almost immediately that's contrasted by escalating challenges, sometimes life-threatening ones, to just basic visibility and safety elsewhere in the world. We really need to unpack these tensions and what they mean for you, for everyone listening globally.
That's the core of it, yeah. So we're structuring this around, let's say, three main areas. First, Europe policy stuff, digital rights, the equality strategy. Second, the digital world visibility, skills, its power, and maybe its limits.
Fragility, yeah.
Exactly. And finally, global politics, from Washington talks down to violence in Kampala and censorship in El Salvador. Okay, let's dive in. Let's pick off with what many are calling a huge win. The EU has suspended its controversial chat control proposal. That's the CSR, Child Sexual Abuse Regulation. Caused a lot of alarm. So why did it suddenly collapse?
Well, it was fundamentally a political failure. But you're right, a massive victory for civil liberties. The proposal just didn't get the votes. The Danish presidency, they couldn't get that qualified majority.
Right, that specific EU voting mechanism.
Exactly. For anyone unfamiliar, it means needing 55% of the 27 member states, and those states have to represent 65% of the total EU population. They didn't get close. Only 12 states voted yes.
And key players like Germany and the Netherlands pulling out must have been the final nail.
Precisely. But what's really interesting here is who opposed it. It wasn't just big tech. It's this really broad coalition. You had IT experts, scientists, civil society groups, and crucially, queer organizations all pushing back.
Why queer org specifically?
They argued that mandatory surveillance, even if the intention was fighting CSA, would just break encryption. And that disproportionately harms marginalized groups, people who rely on secure communication for safety. So it was a win for privacy, but especially for vulnerable communities.
Okay, so that's a win in terms of stopping something bad. But the EU is also trying to be proactive, right? Let's look at the new LGBTIQ plus equality strategy 2026-2030 from the Commission. What's the main takeaway from the Gay 45 reporting on that?
The headline goal is definitely setting an EU-wide standard against queerphobia. Specifically, helping member states actually ban conversion therapies. Commissioner Labib was pretty clear. Outlawing these practices is crucial.
And these practices are pretty horrific.
Yeah, whether it's disguised as counseling or involves physical abuse like electroshock, forced hormones, even exorcistic rituals. These things are globally condemned by the UN, the World Medical Association. It's seen as paramount to stop them.
Sounds good on the surface, banning harm. But I know it wasn't all positive feedback. Where did the community, push back? Where did they say the Commission fell short?
Right. Organizations like ILGA Europe, which is the big European LGBTQI rights umbrella group, they were quite critical. Their main point, the plan just lacks ambition on the core structural stuff, the areas where the EU actually has, political power.
What kind of structural issues? Is this about that classic EU tension, EU law versus what individual countries want?
Absolutely. It hits that right on the head. The strategy doesn't really tackle full recognition of same-sex marriages across borders or ensuring freedom of movement for queer families in all member states.
Which is a huge practical issue.
Huge. And Kim Van Sparentak from the LGBTIQ plus intergroup also pointed out that, focusing on online hate is okay, but the plan doesn't do nearly enough for the specific legal and safety needs of trans and intersex people. There's this feeling the Commission kind of pulled its punches on the really politically tricky bits.
That makes sense. If your marriage isn't recognized just over the border, how equal are you, really? Didn't they mention Hungary's banned Pride Parade as a sort of test case where the EU should be using its power?
Exactly. That was a very clear call for the EU to go beyond just words, beyond supportive statements, and actually use its economic and political clout against member states that are actively rolling back rights.
Okay, let's shift focus now, because often where policy might stall, digital activism steps in. The Gay 45 Digest had some fascinating data on digital skills in Europe. Finland's way ahead, 83% basic proficiency. But there's still a massive gap across the EU.
Huge gap. Nearly half, 44% of EU citizens still lack basic digital skills. And this matters because if you connect that to the queer community, well, research comparing binary and non-binary youth across Europe suggests real differences in how they use digital spaces.
Differences in skills or purpose?
Maybe both. It suggests non-binary youth, maybe because they face more hostility offline, often use digital tools differently. Perhaps prioritizing identity exploration, finding niche, safer online communities, maybe overdeveloping broader digital skills needed for, say, work.
So the skills gap isn't just general access. It's about safe access and specific needs.
Right. Tailored support isn't just a nice idea. It looks like a necessity to bridge that gap safely and effectively for everyone.
And that need for a safe digital space, that really fueled the first big wave of online visibility, didn't it? Thinking about National Coming Out Day this week, our coverage looked back at those early queer YouTubers.
Oh, they were absolute pioneers. People like Tyler Oakley, Troye Sivan, Gigi Gorgeous, Connor Franta. Their influence was just immense. They basically invented this genre of documenting their coming out, showing real, authentic, queer daily life to a global audience.
Which, for so many young people, especially if you were stuck in a rural or really conservative place with zero visible queer community, that was everything.
A lifeline. It turned something intensely private coming out into this shared, visible cultural thing.
Yeah.
And media scholars point to that authenticity as key. It wasn't like polished traditional media. It was vulnerable. And that really helped shift public perception, reassured young viewers that queer life wasn't just struggle or tragedy. It could be, well, ordinary, successful, joyful even.
It makes you think, though, doesn't it? That kind of Wild West digital authenticity versus today's platforms' moderation, algorithms, censorship worries. Can creators now have that same raw impact?
It's a really good question. Now, we do have to pivot, unfortunately, to the much harsher reality of global politics. It's a stark contrast to EU policy debates. Let's start with a moment of, well, cognitive dissonance. Maria Corina Machado wins the Nobel Peace Prize for her anti-authoritarian work in Venezuela, a clear stand against dictatorship.
Right. And that win stopped Donald Trump getting the prize, which his supporters were pushing for. But the really complex part is Machado's own politics, isn't it? She endorsed Trump, called him a visionary.
It perfectly shows how fighting for human rights against one regime doesn't automatically align with, say, progressive politics globally. Anti-authoritarianism here can coexist with supporting populism there. It really complicates the picture, especially looking at Trump's actions closer to home this week.
The Gay 45 reporting highlighted a particularly nasty moment during his meeting with Canadian PM Mark Carney, a transphobic tirade.
Highly targeted, it seems.
Yeah.
Trump used that meeting already tense with talk of tariffs, even economic annexation of Canada, to declare no men and women's sports and rant against woke nonsense.
And the context makes it even worse.
The cruelty is amplified because he knew that PM Carney's child, Sasha, identifies as non-binary.
So it's not just bigotry, it's using personal attacks almost as a distraction, weaponizing identity during high-stakes economic talks.
It looks like it. It integrates anti-trans rhetoric right into foreign policy and economic pressure tactics.
Okay, from that political theater to a genuine life-and-death crisis, Uganda. There was a small but maybe significant move from the Netherlands on asylum seekers.
Yes, and it really confirms how serious the situation is. The Dutch government said that LGBTQ plus asylum seekers whose claims are rejected will be specifically exempt from a new deportation pilot project they have with Uganda.
They're making an exception.
Explicitly, because they recognize the severe risk, the undeniable danger people face under Uganda's 2023 Anti-Homosexuality Act. We're talking penalties up to 20 years in prison.
And what are the latest reports saying about the reality on the ground? From HREPF, the Human Rights Awareness and Promotion Forum.
It's grim. The violence is accelerating, clearly driven by the law's enforcement. HRATF, they're based in Kampala. They documented 18 serious cases affecting 26 people just in August. That's nearly double the number from July.
What kind of cases?
Arrests, severe physical violence, people being evicted by their communities. The law doesn't just criminalize. It basically empowers neighbors to police and report each other. It fuels fear and, frankly, vigilante action.
Systemic persecution, basically. And sort of parallel to that, in terms of ideological control, we see El Salvador banning inclusive language in schools.
Yes, under President Bukele. The education minister banned gender-neutral Spanish terms like amigue, that's a neutral friend, niña for child, and no Citrexes for us.
The X replacing the gendered O or A?
Exactly. It promotes linguistic neutrality. But the government claims they're protecting children from ideological interference.
Sounds like the familiar protecting children line used to roll back rights.
Yeah. It absolutely fits that pattern. Critics immediately pointed out this aligns with the government already removing gender ideology from the curriculum. But even more significantly, it directly flies in the face of a 2022 Constitutional Court order.
An order for what?
An order that mandated the government pass legislation recognizing gender identity rights. So they're essentially using language censorship to ignore a court ruling and their legal obligations to trans and non-binary people.
Okay, after navigating those really tough spots, policy fights, rights crises, let's try to shift gears. Let's celebrate some culture, some rebellion, some inspiration. The Netherlands Wink Awards 2025 highlighted some great stuff recently.
Yeah, it was a really good night for visibility. Amsterdam's mayor, Femke Halsema, won the Ally Award, specifically for her boldness, like attending Budapest's banned Pride March, showing solidarity across borders.
That's significant.
Definitely. There was also a major posthumous award for Musin Hendricks, recognized as the world's first openly gay Muslim cleric. And the Inspiration Award went to I Kissed a Girl, the Netherlands' first ever lesbian dating show.
Great mix, high politics, religious leadership, pop culture. Now let's dive into the cultural recommendations from Gay 45. Film first. Derek Jarman's Caravaggio from '86.
Oh, Jarman. Pure visual defiance. It's not a straightforward biopic of the painter. Jarman deliberately messes with time. You see typewriters, motorbikes, modern haircuts, all in this Renaissance setting.
Why do that?
It's Jarman's political statement. He's blending eras to make Caravaggio's life, his artistic struggle, feel like a timeless declaration of queer defiance. Against silence, against conformity. He's saying this struggle's ongoing, you see.
Connecting past and present struggles. Okay, from visual art to literature, Alan Bratton's novel Henry Henry won a Lambda Literary Award this year.
Yeah, this sounds really sharp. It's a reimagining of Shakespeare's Henriade, plays, Prince Hal and Henry IV, Henry V, but set in like 2010's London aristocracy.
Modern royal.
Sort of modern aristocracy. The main character, Hal Lancaster, is gay, Catholic, heir to this massive legacy. He's grappling with family, privilege, his own identity. It uses that aristocratic setting, the intrigue, to explore tradition versus desire. Internal conflict. Yeah. Who gets to define identity?
Sounds fascinating. And finally, music. Geese from New York, their new album Getting Killed.
This was getting a lot of buzz. It's asking, can rock music still surprise us? Critics love the experimental textures. It shifts around punk energy, then some art rock, indie stuff.
They have lineup changes, right?
They did, but apparently came back stronger. They're not just evolving their sound, they're sort of challenging the genre itself. Can rock reinvent itself without just ditching its roots? It's meant to be a bold listen.
Pulling it all together, what's the big picture from this week's news? We've seen these really complex policy battles, even wins, in Europe, fighting off surveillance, pushing, however slowly, against conversion therapy.
But yeah, those debates happen alongside these devastating real-world setbacks elsewhere. The fact that an EU strategy gets criticized for doing too little for trans rights. Well, that feels almost like a luxury problem when you look at Uganda or El Salvador. There, the fight is still so existential.
Physical safety, freedom from violence.
Even the right to use language that reflects who you are, that digital visibility we celebrated earlier, it's vital, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it clearly doesn't always translate into physical safety on the ground.
That tension, that gap between advocacy and actual lived threat is something for you, our listener, to really hold on to. It pushes us to think about those reports, insufficient action here, escalating violence there, and ask, are we doing enough? Are we becoming silent? Which leads us to this week's quote of the week from James Baldwin. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. You can also listen to any of our articles. Visit gay45.com to read more quality journalism.